Is Rizwan Aslam. I'm a member of the Society of University Otolaryngologists. Today, we're going to have our inaugural CUO Cafe. I'm joined by our guest speaker, Dr. Brian Burkey. Many of you know who he is, and to those few people who do not know who Dr. Burkey is, I'll just give you a quick introduction. Dr. Burkey currently is the chairman of the Cleveland Clinic Indian River Hospital and Regional Institute for Surgical Specialties. This is within the Cleveland Clinic Florida system. Dr. Burkey, for several years, was a professor at Vanderbilt. He was also the vice chair there for several years. He did his undergraduate training, he did his undergraduate education at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. He received his MD from UVA and completed his residency at the University of Michigan. His interest in head and neck surgery led him to a fellowship at Ohio State University, where he completed training in microvascular surgery and head and neck ablative surgery. Following that, Dr. Burkey was at Vanderbilt, where he was the program director for 15 years. He served on the ACGME for 7 years. He was also part of the steering committee that helped found Opto, a significant part of our society. And he also served as the president of CUO. So Dr. Burkey, aside from that, also served as the American Head and Neck Society president with many, many other leadership accolades as well. He has over 20 book chapters and 120 peer-reviewed articles to his name. He's currently married. He lives in Florida with his wife, Maureen, and has a daughter, Rachel. So amongst all those amazing accolades, he also finds time to be a loving husband and father. And we wanted to have Dr. Burkey on this program today because of his, obviously, his experience within academic medicine, his leadership within our society, and to really kind of, pick his brain a little bit on some topics about what CUO meant to him and where he is in his life because of CUO, and maybe some advice that he can give to others. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And Dr. Burkey, how are you? How's it going?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's exciting to be. I forgot it was the inaugural CafeSUO, so I'm excited to be part of that.
Great. Well, welcome. Dr. Burkey, just wanted to get your opinion on the personal impact that CUO has had on your life in terms of your career in academic medicine.
Yeah. Well, Rizwan, I have to say, CUO was kind of the beginning of my career in academics. Truthfully, I had joined Vanderbilt as a young faculty member. Vanderbilt was a small department back then. We had 5 people. And, you're always looking for networking opportunities. And my chairman at the time, Bob Ossoff, was involved in CUO and invited me to, I think one of my first meetings there. Just met great friends, like-minded people, who were interested in education, interested in research, and just interested in friendships, right, outside of work. So I remember enjoying those probably the most among all the meetings. And in fact, every time I went to a meeting, you would hear people go, "This is the best meeting in otolaryngology that I've been involved in." because it was a time to like, I don't know, like some of the other meetings, I think there's a little bit of strutting that we all do. We have to be kind of the big person in the room, so to speak, or at least be amongst them. But SUO was just a good place to let your guard down, be friendly. We drank a lot of whiskey at night and enjoyed each other's company, and it truly was really enjoyable. Some of the very best meetings. And then from that led, honestly, my true interest in education. I was always interested in education. Became, resident director almost immediately after joining Vanderbilt. But I hadn't really thought more deeply about how we educate, right? And how best to educate ourselves and our residents. And so really it was through, again, my involvement in SUO. Bob Ossoff had become president of SUO, and he needed somebody to help direct his program. Back then, SUO was really just a once a year meeting. I mean, I know it is still just a once a year meeting, but literally nothing happened within SUO in the 11 and a half months, right? In between meetings. It was like all the activity was there. We had committees, but they never met, and those sorts of things. So, and the president was really responsible for the entire meeting. There wasn't any support back then for SUO from, again, in between the meetings or for the presidents. The president did it him or herself. And so Bob Ossoff was the president back then, and he looked at me, he called me in his office. I was still young faculty. He said, "Brian, I'm president of SUO. I'd like you to maybe run my meeting," and I
Yeah.
didn't understand what that meant. But first of all, I will just say I was thrilled. We changed the format a little bit, we had some fun with it. And I will say again that, here I am, a young faculty member calling up senior faculty to speak or be on a panel. And no one ever said no, or Brian, why are you bothering me? It was just this sense of camaraderie. And so, and again, we changed things up a little bit that year. We did a lot of panels. Nobody did panels back then,
Mhm.
in academic medicine. They were all 20, 30-minute talks. And but it worked out great. And so I got to, again, meet more people, and then got elected to the executive committee and ultimately became president and instituted some of my own thoughts. So again, I just can't even say, like, it was the beginning of, my true academic time within otolaryngology. So I certainly have a lot to it. So networking, interest in education, leadership opportunities, really, I think a lot of the genesis of that was SUO.
Right. Well, thanks, Brian. And you described something that I think we all share as members of SUO, and that's the sense of community, right? Community centered around academic physicians, like-minded goals. To speak upon that a little bit more, could you talk about, the value of mentorship and networking opportunities, not only for, junior level faculty, but, mid-career and perhaps maybe even senior level faculty members?
For sure. Well, mentorship and networking are key to developing a career. And they go hand in hand. Obviously, mentorship has really been, again, within education, a focus of my career. Like, if I look at my career, obviously I have the microvascular part that I was fortunate enough to get in on the ground floor of. But the other thing I've really centered my career on is education. And within that, probably mentorship in terms of, training residents, training fellows, hopefully mentoring junior faculty. And it's been crucial to me. The old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. There's a lot of truth to that, for sure. And we all know about the importance of, emotional intelligence and success. It's the majority of success, right, in
Right.
one's career. And the way that you develop that is through mentorship, right? And And the way that you kind of get that, your name out is networking. So, and all of that has an impact as adult people, as adult learners, right? We learn from other adults. And that's what makes, that's the whole point about education. I did my master's in education, and really it's that sharing of ideas, right? That allows you to develop your own. It's not kind of the didactic thing that we got in, the didactic model that we got in high school and, grade school, and for some of us medical school, but it really is this kind of adult education. It is kind of sharing information, sharing experiences. So I think, SUO is kind of a built-in way to do that, right? It's almost automatic mentorship and networking. So I would just say it again was probably the most valuable experience early on. And I might add too, it was a way for me to connect. So I was not very involved, interestingly, in the American Head and Neck Society at the time. I was very involved in the American College of Surgeons at a very young age for a variety of reasons, which we don't have time to go into. But I will just say that SUO was kind of my main connection to otolaryngology. I was a little bit involved in the academy, but the academy seemed to be a little bit more focused on kind of more community practice, at least at the time. And so my main opportunity really to network within otolaryngology was in SUO. And fortunately, it was a group that I connected with.
That's great. And I think that, with your education background, specifically your master's in education, where do you see, maybe not directly in line with that, but in some way related to that, how do you feel that SUO contributes or has contributed to the development of education programs in otolaryngology? Obviously, that's part of the charge of the organization. But what ways have you seen, any specific examples maybe that help drive the way that we educate our learners today?
Yeah. Well, that was hopefully a setup question. A lot of the things probably that people watching this today take for granted started or had a bit of a genesis in SUO, right? So, for instance, when I was part of SUO, there was no opto, right? The Otolaryngology Program Directors Organization got its start from SUO. So, and that was fortunately, like all things connected at that time. And so there were a bunch of us who were involved in the formation of Opto, and it was for a variety of reasons, right? I was very involved in the RRC and very involved in the ACS. And it was interesting that many of the surgical groups within the American College of Surgeons already had a program directors organization, right? We were unique in not having one. And as a member of the RRC and ultimately the chair, I would read applications and we'd see that really many times it was just the program directors didn't have the knowledge they needed, right? Easy fixes. But so, putting those two together, a couple of us came together and said, we really need a program directors organization, right? And fortunately, Rich Miyamoto, who was a member of SUO, also at the time, I think, president of the American Academy, donated some money and support for it. The ABOTO, now it's ABOHNS, but back then the ABOTO was very influential in helping us get that off the ground, along with Otto, right, the chair organization. And so with Scott Stringer, anyway, a bunch of us got together and said, let's kind of put it together. So Opto kind of grew up. I think my year as president was maybe, I can't remember exactly which year was the first meeting and which was more the steering committee, but that's how that got off the ground. And really it was a design to help program directors receive the training they need, right? And the camaraderie and the networking that they need to be highly effective. And then I'd like to believe, during my year as president, one of the things I realized was that we didn't talk enough about education, right? And how to educate. So part of my presidential address and part of my presidential year was putting together a couple new committees, looking at novel ways to educate, and trying to encourage people to get things like masters in education, and to really look at that as a career track, right? Which up to that point really hadn't been, and I probably wasn't as influential as I wanted to be in terms of helping to develop that as a career track. But a lot of people took it on their own, within their own universities and lobbied for that. And so now that is, education is almost a career track now for most advancements to associate and full professor. So, so a lot of that happened. And then I think just the idea of looking at how we view our learners, right, within our residencies, and in terms of not really being more prescriptive, but really treating them as adult learners. I think a lot of that came from the work of people in SUO, myself, a couple of the presidents after me were very influential in getting that kind of going. And then honestly, once you get a few people interested, how it is, the learning curve, right? You get a few of the early adopters, it takes off on its own. So I think SUO has been, it's helped me develop my education, but also I think it's helped develop educational programs within our specialty. I will say one thing, just kind of parenthetically, tangentially. I'll never forget the reason I got my master's in education, because I didn't have it yet, right, was in preparation for my presidential address. I started going through a lot of this background, right, in adult education, and really was excited by it. Like I just thought, this is stuff that everybody should know, that I should have known, right? 20 years ago. And that I don't think too many people know. And so I gave this address saying, we should move forward and get, some of us should get our masters, and we should, be more interested in the philosophies of adult education and not PowerPoint lectures and blah, blah, blah. And my biggest fear, truthfully, I can still remember right before I gave it, was that somebody was going to stand up in the audience and go, "Hey, Brian, appreciate your thoughts. What makes you any more qualified than me?" Right? To say that. And in fact, there was one person that stood up and kind of challenged me, but in a friendly way. But the reality was I felt like a fraud, right? And so I decided I wasn't going to feel that way anymore. So that's the year that I decided to get my master's in education, right? So I finished my presidency in 2011. I started my master's in 2012, finished it in 2014. So again, I think the more you dig into things, the more you realize you need to know more, and it can spur a whole new area of your career.
Well, maybe we can have you come back and give another presidential address after your master's, so we can.
That's right. That's right.
Well, kind of to segue into that, so there are a lot of individuals who are pursuing MBAs, MPHs, and I think to a smaller amount of individuals are pursuing a master's in education, medical education. In your opinion, this was obviously a value part of your career. What would you say to somebody that's interested in that? Like, what can they seek to gain that, and how can they leverage that in an academic career, more so than the person that stood up in the audience and asked you, what makes you better, right? What really does, these advanced degrees, they cost money, they take time away from your family, your work, potentially, but, what do you, in a quick second, what do you think What advice would you give to someone?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think timing is key. You kind of touched on it, but the time to get your master's is maybe not when you're at the busiest point in your career, right? Or advanced training, right? It's not when you're getting your microvascular career, your head and neck career, your skull-based career off the ground, or your whatever, complex pediatric otolaryngology practice off the ground. And you're raising young kids and you're, whatever, trying to pay off your student loans. That's probably not the best time, right? It's the time when we may want to, but maybe not the best time to do it. And I don't think they're absolutely critical, right? So for instance, the truth of the matter is, when I did all that research on my own, getting ready for my presidential address, it turned out I learned a whole bunch about adult education that I will say I touched in a much more deep way, robust way during my master's studies, but it wasn't stuff that I didn't know, right? And I do think we can get most of the knowledge we need, without doing that. So it's not absolutely critical. And you have to pick the right time. But if you're truly interested in a subject and you want to really feel like you've quote unquote mastered it, right? Pardon the pun. And the time is right in your career, I don't think there's anything more fun than doing that. I loved every bit of my master's. It was 3 hours, every whatever Tuesday night, for 2 years. And then obviously a lot of weekend hours, but I loved learning. It was so much fun to learn again, something outside of surgery. The collegial banter back and forth, the sharing of ideas, it opens you up to a whole lot of different ideas and a whole lot of different ways of looking at things that you wouldn't normally get. In terms of, and that's a way you can develop your career. And it does give you, in fact, some legitimacy so that if you want to pursue something, down the field or down the way you can. Earning potential wise, I have to tell you, the master's in education, probably not the best option. I don't think it has ever helped me earn anymore. The MBA does, I think. But it certainly makes things better. The funny thing was, in 2 years, what I figured out was people said, what was the big aha moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I ever had that aha moment. I hate to say it, right? If I had it, it was right during my presidential address, right? But when I would talk to my students, when I would talk to my colleagues, and I would say, geez, I don't know how much I got out of it, they go, oh my God, you are a different teacher than you were 2 years ago, right? And so I think it's that slow, subtle change that I never picked up, but that all of a sudden obviously made a difference to them, right? And I had several of my residents, in fact, saw me before and after, and said there was a dramatic change in my teaching, that I was more open to their feedback, that I was, kind of looking at it from their perspective more, rather than just like teaching down at them. So anyway, I do think it's worthwhile. And the other thing, again, just very tangentially that I'll say is, some of it is just, again, more knowledge. Somebody, I forget who, wrote basically, all these extra degrees are really just an increase in your vocabulary, right? Your useful vocabulary. So it turns out that someone who does an advanced degree like law or medicine learns about 40,000 new words. And so a master's, most people say around 20,000, new words that you'll learn and make part of your vernacular, and so, that's real, right? Those are a different way to look at things, a different way to process new information. So anyway, so again, I think there's a benefit to it, but it has to be at the right time. Otherwise, you just make your life miserable. I did try and start my MBA. One of my buddies did too.
Yeah.
Another head and neck microvascular surgeon. We both started a couple years earlier. We both made it about a semester into it, and we said, "This is crazy," right? I actually started my MBA about 3 or 4 years before my master's in education. No, probably 8 or 10 years before my master's in education. And I made it through my first semester, and I go, "Nope, this is right." I had 5 free hours a week, and I just used them up, right? And and so and that was definitely not the right time. So I bailed and waited for the right time.
I think you illustrated a couple important points. I mean, obviously, there's never a downside to learning a new tool or gaining experience in a new field. And I think it's important to recognize that doing a master's is a certain point in your career when you have experience, right? So you had years of experience, and you can sit at the table and discuss things about education and learning that are much more practical versus coming right out of residency and then going right into a master's program. And I think the same could be said for MBA programs. Working allows you to complete the program in a meaningful way. Great. Well, thank you for that. And I think we're going to switch gears a little bit. So we kind of talked about education and the impact the SUO makes on learners and on mentorship and so forth. But talk to me about what SUO, the impact of SUO on patients, right? At the end of the day, we are clinicians, we are educators, but we're also clinicians and very dedicated clinicians. Can you talk about the impact of what SUO has on patient care?
Well, I think completing the discussion from the last, I mean, a lot of patient care is education, right? I think that's, if I have patients ever compliment me about my care, a lot of it is that I took time to sit and, teach them about their disease and all that. Okay, so teaching is teaching, whether, it's still adult learning. So, okay, but putting that aside, direct patient care. I think, again, a lot of the talks around SUO, when we have our annual meetings, deal with different aspects of patient care. I think we learn a lot. I know I did, particularly early on. And I think that the networking that you get, you go to SUO and you have your most recent 5 difficult/disaster cases in the back of your mind, right? And you sit down with a friend and you discuss, what you do. And I think it helps refine your practice. I think that's a large part of it. None of us are great at doing that on a routine basis. I know when I trained residents and they left, the academic program, their number one complaint when they left, right, was I never had anyone to discuss things with, right? I don't have any partners now that I can talk over difficult cases with. They miss that. So I think SUO provides just a natural outlet of that. And SUO now, again, maybe not as we had envisioned back in 2010, 2011, but it has become much more of a 12-month organization, right? There's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, just the newsletter, right? I mean, that's a big deal. This program, right, just shows evidence that SUO's mission is continuing throughout the year and providing educational opportunities for people. So again, I think there's a lot of a lot of the impact of SUO directly on patient care, and then indirectly too, obviously, in terms of as we train residents, right? They're going to do patient care down the way. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Great. And yeah, I think like you said, I think the collaborations, the networking, the education for our patients, and also the various quality tools that we discuss and go over, I think those
Mhm.
all being implemented into our practices. And I think the nice thing about when you go to SUO is you come back kind of rejuvenated or invigorated, whatever word you want to use, with new ideas and meeting people from various programs, various departments throughout the country, some in very similar situations, some in very different situations. But you come home and, from the meeting, and you definitely have that, hey, you know what, I came up with a couple new ideas that can directly impact your patients or indirectly impact your patients. So
Right.
I agree with you. Couple more questions for you here on
Sure.
Cafe Suo
No,
today.
no.
One of the things is what, with all your awesome experience, what advice does Dr. Brian Burkey have for emerging leaders,
Mm.
members of our society or otolaryngologists at large or anyone, to the benefits of joining societies like SUO, but also on, personal growth and a career in academic medicine. This is kind of a very broad question, and
Yeah,
you
no,
could
I
probably
know,
sit
I
here for
know.
a very long time and tell me many amazing things about this. But, what advice would you give and to
Yeah, okay. Well,
younger
this
younger
is this
faculty
is
members?
going to fly in the face of a lot of information that I think is given as advice today, which is, kind of protect your time and don't overstretch yourself and, whatever. That's kind of
Yeah.
what I hear through a lot of professional, networking today. I had to tell you that may work in certain instances, but um, I think if you're gonna love your job, right? And maybe not at the expense of your family. I don't want that. You got to find some balance in your life. But I would say, um, spend a lot of your energy in what you love doing, right? So, and now as people get older, they always go, "Oh, you have to learn how to say no." And I would say you really have to learn how to say yes almost all the time, right? If you really want to develop a career that's meaningful and fun. That is, when a referring physician calls you, say, sure, I'm, happy to see that patient, right? And likewise, when people call you to, do things in the field, be a speaker or write a paper or whatever, right? Be part of CafeSUO. Um, Say yes, right? Just say yes and get engaged, and learn about different topics, right? And, you know, so in my own career, I always say I never knew exactly what I wanted to do. So I tended to just say yes. I threw a lot of mud at the wall, and eventually, in certain spots, that mud started to build up, right? And that became my career. And that's how I got involved in education, right? It was just like whatever happened, I got involved, in education, American College Surgeons, SUO, and then ultimately the American Head and Neck Society, like that. But I didn't plan that. I mean, it's nice to plan your career, but the reality is sometimes it just happens organically. And so, saying yes essentially amounts to kind of throwing mud at the wall and see what sticks, and then build there. And, as I was watching a movie the other night, um, as they say, carpe diem, seize the day. If you're offered an opportunity, take it. If you don't like it, that's fine. You've tried it. But again, I would say, spend your energy doing what you love and throw yourself into it full bore. That's kind of, if I were to say that's my advice, that's my advice. I think that's what makes people joyful.
Oh, thanks, Brian. And before we wrap up today on Cafe Suo, I just wanted to get your vision for the future of SUO. You've been involved with the society, you helped develop much of the society. Where do you see the vision I mean, what's your vision, perhaps, or what direction would you like to see SUO go in? And really, with the challenges that we have in healthcare today, meeting the demands of education, all the world's medical problems, where do you think SUO is headed? And what kind of vision do you think we should have for the future for SUO?
Yeah, great question. Again, I'm going to be more open-minded here, less specific. But I think, again, it's stay true to your mission. A lot of what SUO is about collegial networking. It's about education and mentorship, right? And it's about education. And all those things are ever more critical than they were, 32 years ago when I started in my practice, right? Burnout's a big issue. And what helps with that? Well, it turns out enjoying your job, networking, mentorship, right? All those things.
Yeah.
And so I honestly think that's the key, is to stay nimble and address the needs, that exist in the way that you can, right? Meaning, okay, you have to educate. Well, now we have a lot of different ways to educate, online education, Zoom, those sorts of things. So maybe you have to be, nimble in that way, but be nimble while maintaining your dedication to the mission at hand. So I don't know that there's a specific answer. One of the things that, people are talking about now is like an online education for residents. That came up years ago, actually, while I was president, the year after. The time wasn't right then, to do it that way. We tried to address educational deficiencies in other ways, but now maybe it's a better time, who knows? But again, I think an example where we got to stay true to the mission, but really be nimble enough to address it, based on the opportunities at the time.
Great. Thank you, Brian. And I think we're going to wrap it up here. And I just want to thank you again for joining us today on CafeSUO, the inaugural CafeSUO. And thank you for all you've done for the organization and for the field of otolaryngology. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today. To our audience, we're going to let Dr. Burkey any closing remarks before we wrap up here. If you have anything else, Brian, you want to say before we...
I would just say, I hope that the listeners are, they're engaged people if they've listened this far, right? Congratulations for listening this far. And, really make the most of the organization, right? The more, again, to be cliché, the more you put in, the more you get out, and enjoy the organization, utilize it fully, and love the organization. I think, again, we all have that feeling when we leave, like we've all had a big group hug at the end of those meetings, and I just, take advantage of that and the opportunities it affords.
Thank you, Brian. And we look forward to seeing all our viewers and anybody interested in joining SUO. Please visit the website. Also, our annual meeting is going to be held in November. I'd also like to thank Dr. Mark Wax, the chair of our committee, fellow colleagues on the committee, William Collins, David Brown, Beth Fauble for her assistance in putting this webinar together. And I guess that's it. That's our first CafeSUO. And Dr. Burkey, it's been a pleasure. Look forward to catching up with you soon. And CafeSUO, it's what's in your cup. Talk to you soon. Thank you.